remarks and things, and let you know a little bit about who I am and just kind of what I do, and then dive into the content of what I want to share or offer for you all today. My name is Joe Farrell. I'm an eco pastor. I'm not presently serving in an eco church. My eco claim to fame is that I sat in the room with 7 others, including Dana Allen and Marty Crumpler and John Crosby and a handful of others, and wrote Eco Polity into existence. So I can truly say I was there be eco before eco was a thing. I had the great privilege of just being invited to be a part of that team. So eco is deep in my heart. I love what we're trying to do with creating a 21st century church movement. And so I really am here sharing this information because I love what we're trying to be about. All that being said, my day job right now is I'm the president of Agora Search Group. And what Agora does is partners with churches and Christian ministries, nonprofits, to place senior level leadership. So senior pastor, executive pastor, high level leadership as associate pastors, that level in the church. In the nonprofit sector, it's CEOs, CFOs, vice presidents, kind of that high level of church and Christian ministry leadership. So what you're not going to get in this seminar, and again for those walking in, thank you and welcome. What you're not going to get is the opportunity to say, I want to be a candidate, or I want to talk to you about helping me find the role, because that's not what this seminar is about. This seminar is about creating a PNC and how to go through a process. And so I'm going to talk about the challenge of it, which I think is one of the most important steps that most people who say yes to a PNC don't realize, is the challenge of it. And then I'm going to tell you about a process. I've been a candidate more times than I want to count, because being a candidate is painfully hard. It's really hard to be a pastor candidate. I've also been on the other side. I've been on the hiring side. And I've hired everything from interns to colleagues and associate pastors. And so the whole spectrum of things that I've been involved in. But I've never, until I joined Agora, I never actually understood how comprehensive a process ought to or could be. And so I'm going to share a boiled down version of Agora's secret sauce in the process. Don't tell the owner of Agora that I'm sharing exactly what we do with you all here at Eco. But like I said, I love Eco. And so the other thing you're not going to get is an hour-long infomercial about Agora Search Group. If you want to talk to me about Agora and how, what I do in my day job and how I go about it, I'm here all the way through Thursday afternoon, so let's set up a time to connect. I'd be happy to do that. What I really want you all to be able to do is leave here understanding the full challenge that you face with the PNC and having some sense of idea of what you could possibly do or even pieces of this process, so that as your church engages in this PNC process, or if you're already in one, what you can do kind of along the way to hopefully improve it and raise your chances of discerning a stronger candidate for calling to your church. I'll also try to go through it pretty quickly so that we have time at the end for questions and interactions. I'm a father of 4. They're 13, 11, 9, and 3. So I am used to being constantly interrupted. And so if you've got a burning question and you just can't wait, feel free to shoot your hand up. If some of you want, there's a few more seats on this side and one right here in the front. If any of you want to come, be comfortable for this time.
I have a burning question.
Okay, burning question already. Yes.
When you put your slide things up, okay, are those going to be posted on the webpage?
You know what? I've got cards up there. I haven't been asked by ECO to share them anywhere, so I wouldn't know where to share them. I'd be happy to share them with you. Okay. So grab one of my business cards, and I'll mention that on the table if you do want to know more about Agora and how we do it. Little brochure and my business card over there that you can grab.
Okay. Thank you.
Good. And then for those of you that walked in, there's a little bag that says hairdryer on it. If you want to drop, if you would let's just pass that around for those who came in. If you drop your business card or I'll write on a piece of paper contact information, I am going to give away Tim McConnell's Happy Church. He's the senior pastor at First Presbyterian, Colorado Springs. Great little book out of University Press, and Tim signed it just for you. So we'll raffle that off at the end. All right. So, one other thing you won't get is a whole lot of Star Trek references. That's it. Pastor Trek going to where no PNC's gone before, like that kind of loose references. That's the end of the Star Trek references. So we'll go on from that, all right? So if you came for a lot of sci-fi, fascinating illustrations, not in this session, wrong session, all right? Okay, so I'm going to just first frame the challenge of what you have when you actually take on this responsibility and this role of a PNC. This is a monumental task, and it's not getting easier. Mm-hmm. There's a huge volume of need. You may have already heard 40% of our pastors in ECO who are ordained and in active positions serving ministry are 60 and older. Really not, and that number is a year old, according to Dana and Nate, Dana Allen. And so within the next 4.5 to 5 years, 40% of our current clergy are of retirement age. We also don't have traditional channels. The average age of pastors 20 years ago was 44. Now the average age is 54. So it's not even just our problem. It's not even just ECO or Presbyterians that are looking at this potential crisis of pastoral leadership in the church. Seminary pipelines that we used to rely on have dried up or become unreliable. There was a day when you could look at a pastor's resume and say, oh, they graduated from this seminary. That means they believe these set of core doctrines and principles. Sadly, that's just not true. I've also noticed, I think in the last 20 years, the caliber of student that enters seminary today is much less mature in their faith than they were 20 years ago. 20 years ago, seminaries were turning students away because they didn't show the maturity or the drive or whatever it might be. Today, seminaries are struggling. They're in the red and they're gushing money, and they're recruiting students to come to them. And so even someone at the end of a seminary experience is in a different place than they were 10, for sure 20 years ago. So that's one place that's dried up. A lot of us who've come from the PCUSA are used to having this huge network, 10,000 plus churches. And a lot of those that had associate pastors. I mean, that's a critical mass from which you could draw and recruit other pastors. We're at 438 or something like that right now. There's just not enough. So looking within ECO isn't a viable option. So you have to think bigger and larger and figure out where do we go to find a potential pastor outside of our existing network. A lot of people, their solution to this is we'll create something on the website. That's only going to be as good as it is people maintaining their information and updating. And 6 months into it, what you end up having is a whole bunch of stuff that's no longer relevant or updated. Even having a searchable kind of database, like if any of you did a PNC experience in the old PCUSA model, you'd write out all your CIF, you'd send that, the denomination would run it through its program, and they'd send you back 70 PIFs, of which 1 or 2 you might consider contacting, maybe. And so that whole model, even the website idea, which was clunky at best when it was working, just isn't really a viable way to address the challenge that we have. A pastor search also has a lot of cost involved. And this is one area I don't think churches or people, even like nominating committees, when they're suggesting people that they think ought to be on a PNC, aren't really thinking about what the cost of this. There is an emotional and spiritual cost for the people that are on the PNC, especially if it takes longer than 13 months. And people in the church are saying, what's taking so long? Why aren't you guys making any progress? Are you even working? Like, all those kind of questions, that just takes an emotional toll on people. Spiritually, it's difficult. You can actually form like a little spiritual community, a spiritual formation group out of a PNC that functions like a small group. So it can be something that's very enriching in the life of somebody who's involved. But there is a spiritual toll. There's an energy that comes out in this ministry of serving on a PNC that I just don't think gets realized unless you've done it before. There's time, especially in lay. You've got a lot of lay leaders that are on this committee or on this team, and they're giving up their time to that. But then there's also, so there's a time that's involved in the individuals, but there's also just the length of time that these searches can take. And if you've got a committee that's meeting 2 hours every week, that's rather exceptional. A lot of committees are more than every other week kind of thing. And the time that it takes then to review, to find a candidate, to interview them, to review their sermons, all of that, it's an exponential amount of time that builds up in the process of doing that. So all that also then creates stress on this. If you have an existing staff at your church, that living in the unknown, there's a whole bunch of there's rumors about when a new pastor comes in, whether you're going to fit that new pastor or not, and so there's all this like uncertainty and all this that builds up in the life of the staff. Similar to the elders or those on the PNC, of like they start to feel the weight over time of the responsibility in this. One of the other things just about cost, so money is involved. I've never known a PNC that doesn't at some point include food in their time together. That's a great thing, really valuable. There's also the expense of people traveling, bringing candidates in, supporting them. If you use additional resources, like ECO's new partnership with ProScan kinds of things, if you use other consultants, whatever, there's always also a financial cost. No matter how you do it, there's always a financial cost involved in it. There's also the cost to consider of getting it wrong. And this is part of why this is such a monumental task that a PNC takes on. This is not like a scientifically based study, but I made a lot of inquiry, and Jim Singleton said I could actually quote him on this. So this is more just anecdotal kind of story. But his assessment, he said, I think I probably observed 100 pastoral transitions in my ministry experience. And he'd say, of those 100, I would just pencil in, if I were to write a number, 20% of those, actually the new pastor came in and grew the church to the next level. 30% were able to maintain status quo. And 50% led to some kind of decline or went really wrong. Not a very good batting average for PNCs in the Presbyterian world. It just speaks to how challenging this is, and also how difficult it is for us as Western American, predominantly white educated Presbyterians to do discernment. We actually don't we might be better off casting lots when we get down to a final 5 candidates than trusting our own gut instincts and trying to figure out who we are guessing might be a good fit.
Joe, there's also a cost, as a transitional pastor, there's a cost to that PNC when they bring in the wrong person.
Yeah.
There is guilt and all kinds of heaviness that they carry, and it's not easy for them to get rid of because they feel like they failed the church.
Right. Yeah. Transitional pastors have costs. So there's a lot of ways that you can measure and evaluate to add to the weight. Now, I'm trying to put a little bit of weight on your shoulders. I want you all to feel the task of what it is to engage in a pastor search and how seriously we need to take this as a denomination so that we can find and build and create pipelines to draw the type of leadership and the future of pastoral leadership and ministry in our churches. And so it's, the discernment is also difficult, I think, for us because every single PNC starts off as an amateur endeavor. Maybe PNCs have 1 or 2, possibly 3 people who have done it in the past, but generally it's the first time anyone's ever done this. And so it's a huge learning curve for people on a PNC as well. And it's different than hiring, like a lot of times PNCs think, well, we'll go get Sam and Betty because they're both in HR in the professional world. So they've hired a lot of people. But hiring a pastor is not like hiring a CEO, or it's not like hiring an accountant, or it's not like hiring someone to come and clean your home. Like there's a different challenge involved with hiring a pastor. If it were easy, there would already be a pastor Uber app or a pastor Tinder app where you could just swipe left or swipe right if you like that pastor or not. It's not easy. And so one of the things, and this is some of these words I've heard Bill Hybels use, I've heard other people use. I don't know who invented them or who used them first. A number of churches that I know of use these kind of different areas to evaluate and consider how to staff or how to call pastors. But I'm going to use these kind of a framework and give you a process on how to address all four of these. So first one is core competencies. That's really just sort of the essentials that almost anybody could figure out. Does it seem like this person could do the job? So resumes or a CV, sermon samples, lurking on their LinkedIn page and their Facebook, and so most of the stuff that you'll need to know about core competencies you can find online these days. Second one is chemistry. This is the idea of fit. How does this person going to fit? Inventories can be helpful with this, personality tests, assessments of leadership styles, all of these kind of things that go into assessing a person's potential match in terms of culture and DNA in the church. Third is idea of character. Does this pastor have self-awareness about their own brokenness? Do they know their weaknesses? Do they know how they could unintentionally hurt other people? Have they repented of sin in their life? Have they experienced restoration and grown in their own faith as a disciple? More than just their ability to stand up front and teach. And do they have a character, the kind of character that you would hope for in your pastor? And then calling. Does the person really feel called to serve this particular flock? Or is this, are they looking for a stepping stone to something bigger and better? Or do they just really need a job? And you all have a good salary posted. Like, what is the calling on this person's part? And how does that fit with what you're all looking for? So how do we go about this then? And so I want to just lay out a process. And this is I hope you'll find a pretty thorough process. And again, this is probably, I'll tell you, I've boiled this down, and it's still going to seem like a lot, and it's still going to seem overwhelming. My expectation is that nobody's going to be doing this full time on a PNC, a lay-led PNC, unless you're working with an outside professional or you've got somebody on your committee that's going to give 40 hours a week to it. There's just a lot that can go into a process that can go even deeper. But what I'm going to give you would be something that I think you'll see is really thorough, but also is going to be a significant investment of your own time. So the first part of this process would just be to know a lot of things going in. So know thyself. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. Mission assessment in our movement right now, if you have made a presentation to your missional affinity group within the past year, that's a really good place to kind of start and assess, like, this is who we think we're becoming. And I mentioned this in Nate Griezmann's seminar yesterday, if you were there, but you want to have people on a PNC that are windshield people more than rearview mirror people. Because it's helpful to know your past and where you've come from, but the PNC is focusing on where are we going. And so if you're a church that doesn't know kind of where what you're leaning into, it's hard then to engage a pastor to find out if where that pastor's heart is leaning is going to match the same direction. And this doesn't have to be laser focused and specific, but there has to be some level of understanding of what you're leaning into. And so knowing what you're looking for, is there a certain leadership style that you think you need? Is there a certain preaching style you think you need? How much weight is kind of age or stage of life going to play into your discernment process. So knowing what you're looking for is going to help you make good decisions and good discernment, but then also being willing to hold that loosely. I think sometimes people want to define what they're looking for and they lock onto that, and there's no room for them to be surprised by what the Spirit of God might bring. So you might think you want somebody who has senior pastor experience of a church of a certain size, but then you might miss an associate pastor who's the next John Ortberg, because you had a certain thing you were looking for. So I would say know what you're looking for, but then hold it open-handed. And let the Spirit of God help you all discern and discover what might be appealing to you. And then the third thing, and this is really important, is as you know all these things, to set reasonable expectations. So a little comic, don't know if you can all read this, but the pastoral search committee at PNC is sitting around a table, and the guy says, basically, we're looking for an innovative pastor with a fresh vision who will inspire our church to remain exactly the same. That's honestly what too many PNCs end up with, because they want to continue what they were just doing. They just don't want to feel that change. And so being able to have the willingness to lean into something, it's going to change no matter who you bring. You can't keep it the same. And so having that understanding of the PNCs, you're actually helping the church set the course for the next season of ministry. Another thing I always kind of counsel PNCs about and advise them is that a lot of them, when you sort of lay out what they're looking for, they want somebody who's around 40 years old, with 35 years of experience, who has their doctorate, who preaches like Tim Keller or John Ortberg, and they also raise the dead and walk on water. And I just have to tell them that Jesus is not available to come be your pastor. You've got to have some different idea. And so to set your expectations to something that is actually reasonable will really benefit you as a team. And then leadership-wise, to set expectations for the church that's reasonable of what type of person you might be able to call as your pastor. All right, so step 2, just cast the net. This is the challenging thing, again, that most PNCs don't realize they need to do the work on. In some of the traditional ways, you'd sort of finish your thing and you put it out there, and posting it. And church, really creative churches not only post it in their Presbyterian things, they put it on like church staffing. Some of those non-Presbyterian things get really creative. So one of the things the owner of Agora taught me about postings, when you put something on the web, the only people that are going to end up finding it are people that are looking at they're going to somehow find, and the people that are looking at postings, that's going to bring you the very best of the unqualified, unsatisfied, and unemployed. And I think this is especially true in ECO. Whenever ECO churches post a position, there's a lot of unsatisfied PCUSA pastors looking to make a jump. And some of them are great, and I am a former PCUSA pastor who moved over with First Pres Colorado Springs. So not all of them are just, I'm not saying discount them, but I'm saying be wary that you're potentially interviewing someone who's disguising some brokenness, disguising some pain, disguising frustration, because they're running away from something. They're not necessarily running to you. So postings are helpful. We do postings. They're really good, but you just got to have a good process to discern and filter through those postings. I think relationship networking is the most underutilized tool that committees do. Calling people, and not because you're trying to recruit them, but because you hope they know the person that you're trying to find. So this means a lot of time on the phone, a lot of calling strangers, people you don't know, explaining what you're looking for, and then being good enough to extract from them 2 or 3 names of their friends who they think might be good potential connections for you. This is the way that I generate most of my leads for pastors that I'm finding and placing, is by calling people that I don't know, talking to them about opportunity, discovering what they want, and then saying, who do you know that might be a good fit? And so I'm drilling 2 or 3 degrees of separation away from people that I know to try to find people that are worth knowing to bring into a process. And so to cast the net, you've got to go beyond the familiar and the comfortable. So even considering what other denominations have pastors potentially that might be a good fit. What about the PCA? What about the ECC? What about the RCA? What about, there's a whole bunch of, there's 60 plus Reformed denominations in the U.S., so there should be places that we should be able to look other than just PCUSA or within ECO. So going beyond things that are familiar and comfortable. And all of this part is just to try to address the core competencies. And so what you're getting from candidates at this level is a resume or a CV, a sermon, couple sermon samples, maybe a cover letter or something like that. So you're just trying to determine, can they do the very highest level? Like, do they have the essentials? Is it worth them spending time with us and us spending time with them? If it is, then the next thing you want to do is actually get to know your candidates. At this part of the process, this is where you're actually asking for an investment of time of 6 to 12 hours from a candidate. So you need to have some kind of tool or method. It could be 20 questions that you want them to ask, or that you want to ask them and you want them to answer. It could be, have a statement of faith, tell us about your leadership style, how have you dealt with, elders in the past, give us a review the essential tenets of ECO, talk about theology. You could talk about, you've already listened to their sermons at this point, but then you might be asking, how do you actually prepare your sermon? Do you just, go online and download someone else's sermon? Or how do you study? Like, do you take 40 hours a week to prepare a really good sermon? Or do you do it in 5? So all of these are sort of the things, like you're getting to know these people. How do they deal with conflict management? What is their ecclesiology or their missiology? How do those things play into their ministry and leadership in the church? So this is where you're taking the time. And I put time in capital letters because there's just no shortcut for this. You're asking them to make an investment of time in you at this point of the process so that then you can respond and engage with the content they send. Once they've responded to you, maybe through this questionnaire you've developed, then you might set up a video interview, 1 or 2 hours, where you're interacting with them over the content that they've shared. And this is also where you begin to look for nonverbals. Is the person's just presentation of who they are and how they carry themselves, is that going to fit for what you're looking for, what you desire in your pastor? And this is addressing all this question of chemistry. Is there potentially a good fit in this pastor? I would just say this, that don't, I like the PDP that ECO is using and the ProScan tool. The weakness in it, I think, is that people can depend too much on the percent match score that comes out of that in that profile. This is where I would just say to hold it loosely, because sometimes what you think you're looking for and what God actually thinks you need are different. And pastors often, at least, well, not all of them, but a lot of them that I know, they're pretty smart, men and women, and they know how to game and fool these things to appear different so they're answering the questions based on what they think you're looking for more than who maybe they truly are. And so the things can be fooled. So that tool is an excellent tool, but it's not a substitute for hard work and time. Okay? So all that part is to address the chemistry side. Fourth step is then it's time to really dig deep. Once you've kind of done the core competencies, you've received this chemistry, you still think, okay, this person could be our next pastor. Then you want to go to the next level of digging deep. When you get to this place, you might have 2 to 4 candidates that you're really focusing in on. And this is where, and still this is where some churches don't do this, and this is where I think a lot of mistakes happen. Is you can learn a lot by going to observe a candidate in their context. So, and you do this when you show up to visit another pastor in their context. Make sure 1, they know you're coming, and make sure 2, they know you're not going to let anyone know why you're there. When a search committee is recruiting another pastor and it gets out that pastor is looking, it undercuts the ministry of that pastor in a tremendously harmful way. So you have a huge responsibility for confidentiality and for maintaining an anonymous visit. So don't show up in your church van, wearing your hat saying, I'm looking for a pastor, you just blend in, you have a cover story, visiting some friends from out of town, just thought we'd pop in, you know, whatever you want it to be, but you do this in a